Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our digital training curriculum. Today, we will discuss a critical life threatening condition that every first responder should be aware of, and that's called Commotio Cordis. This is a rare phenomenon. It's often triggered by blunt trauma to the chest, which can cause sudden cardiac arrest, even in young and healthy athletes. So, we'll break down the mechanics of how this happens and the intervention that can save a life. By the end of this lesson, you'll not only understand what Commotio Cordis is, but more importantly, you'll be prepared to recognize it and act decisively in the moments that matter most. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's talk about Commotio Cordis. So, Commotio Cordis is a very, very rare phenomenon that has to do with a disruption in the normal cardiac electrical conduction system within the heart. And under normal circumstance, you have an impulse that's generated by the SA node or the sinoatrial node that sits in the top right portion of the heart, known as the right atrium. So that node, through a process called automaticity, fires as the pacemaker of the heart, and that impulse is then transferred down into the left where it's intercepted by the avioventricular node, or what's called the AV node, and then sent down again into the left where it's picked up by the Purkinje fibers, which wrap around the heart, and all of that translates into this nice mechanical rhythmic wrapping motion in which the heart beats and ejects blood into systemic circulation. Now, we know two things about objects in motion, and the first is that objects in motion carry energy in a stored form, and the second is that that energy can be transferred. So in a car accident, for example, you have a car that's traveling down the highway, say 60 miles an hour, and that car slams head on into a wall. So all of that stored energy that car is carrying is then transferred from the vehicle into the wall itself. And that process is the point of modern car designs, which have front ends that crumple rather than remain rigid. So just like cars traveling down highways, things like baseballs or hockey pucks, or in the case of Damar Hamlin, a lowered shoulder from a receiver, all carry this pent-up kinetic energy. And like a car traveling down a highway, if they suddenly stop, they transfer that kinetic energy into whatever they strike. And if the object they strike happens to be the chest wall of an athlete, that energy they're carrying is then transferred into the myocardium. And if that energy transfer happens to fall in a very specific 20 millisecond window during ventricular repolarization, it can cause a very dangerous and often fatal cardiac dysrhythmia called ventricular fibrillation. Now, think again of your normal cardiac conduction cycle from the SA node to the AV node and down to the Purkinje fibers through a process called depolarization. After each cell in the chain depolarizes, it must reset through a process called cellular repolarization. And the point of this is just to get ready for the next depolarizing impulse. Now, if during this repolarization process the cells suddenly receive another depolarizing force, such as from a baseball or a lowered shoulder, the cells become really confused, and in a very maladaptive compensatory mechanism, they all begin firing sporadically at once. Mechanically, this results in the bottom two chambers of the heart quivering instead of beating rhythmically, which results in an immediate decrease in cardiac output, unconsciousness, and cardiac arrest. And that is the pathology of Commotio Cordis. So how do we treat this? Well, the problem is a sporadic firing of all these cardiac cells instead of a rhythmic firing down the chain. So basically, there's a lot of electrical noise amongst the cells in the myocardium, and none of them really know what to do. So externally, we can clear that noise through a process called defibrillation. And in a public setting, this is accomplished through a device called an automated external defibrillator, or an AED. An AED will analyze the patient's heart rhythm to determine if the rhythm is shockable. And what we mean by shockable is it one of these cardiac dysrhythmias that's creating a lot of electrical noise that we need to clear externally? If the AED determines that the rhythm is shockable, it will advise the responder with a prompt shock advised. When a shock is delivered, the AED sends a large amount of electricity from pad to pad, which passes through the myocardium and clears the electricity. The hope is that the heart recognizes this clearing and resumes normal pacemaking via the SA node. So an understanding of all this pathology doesn't change the clinical management of somebody in cardiac arrest. That still entails rapid activation of the emergency response system, the initiation of high-quality CPR, and early defibrillation if indicated. But an in-depth understanding does often translate to precious seconds in critical situations when it comes to clinical decision-making, and those seconds can be the difference between life and death.